The article I chose was Teachers' Assessment of ESL Students in Mainstream Classes, Challenges, Strategies, and Decision-Making by Terry Milnes and Li-Ying Ching. I chose this article because I teach ESL EAL students who are learning English through the content area, and I was interested in how regular or mainstream teachers developed assessment strategies to meet the needs of the EAL learner. Some background information. Statistics Canada revealed that in 2002, almost 46% of immigrants to Canada did not speak English or French as a first language. Urban schools are being transformed, and policy documents in Ontario instruct teachers to make appropriate modifications to teaching, learning, and evaluation strategies for EAL learners. Literature review. There has been little research studies conducted into how high school teachers modify instruction and assessment practices in Canada. More research has been conducted in United Kingdom, Australia, and Hong Kong in the context as English as an additional language or second language. In the high school context, research studies were done by Chang, Rogers, and Yu 2004, and Chang, Rogers, and Wang 2008, and Aradossi in 2007. On the basis of interviews with teachers from Virginia, most of whom taught at the high school level, McMillan and Nash 2000 characterized classroom assessment practice as individualized and idiosyncratic. These studies were based on the lack of Canadian-based research in high school setting. The focus of the study was on assessment-related practices of 7 high school teachers whose mainstream classes included ESL students. The assessment research literature suggests that the marks awarded by classroom teachers reflect a mix of achievement and non-achievement measures. ESL students in the mainstream classrooms. Literature relating to the presence of ESL students in mainstream classes has suggested that some teachers view subject-related content mastery and second language development as separate processes, with the latter seen as the responsibility of ESL specialist teachers. Ruse and Fix 2004 found similar findings, indicating that teachers in the mainstream classrooms felt intimidated by the task of developing strategies of benefit to ESL students. Mainstream teachers who had limited contact with ESL students had low expectations, in contrast to teachers who collaborated with the principal and ESL specialists, as these teachers expressed confidence with their ability to work with ESL students. However, even though the teachers were comfortable having ESL students in their mainstream classrooms, they did not know about specific instructional and assessment strategies that might benefit the ESL student. Canadian study of ESL students in the mainstream classrooms. Klesmer in 1994 noted that teachers overestimated the achievement of 12-year-old ESL students on a set of reading, writing, speaking, and listening tasks. Teachers mistook competence and everyday communication skill as language skills that were more highly developed than objective test instruments. Hong and Morgan, 2003, note an increased attention paid by some teachers of mainstream classrooms combining language and content in instruction, but pointed to difficulties teachers apparently have in integrating language and content when assessing ESL students' written work. Although Hung and Morgan acknowledge that few high school teachers currently have enough linguistic knowledge to evaluate ESL students' writing in terms of both discipline-specific content and discourse features, they nonetheless pointed to efforts currently underway to develop resource materials that will assist teachers in recognizing the language features associated with their own academic discipline. Another Canadian study was done by a Canadian university professor, Edersey, to undergraduate students in a class of ESL and non-ESL students. He noted that feedback to students must be understood and analyzed, not through specific written comments made by assessors on test papers or essays, but also in the larger context of in-class discussions of course assignments and expectations. The theoretical framework for this study was research relating to teachers' classroom assessment practices and studies relating to ESL students in mainstream classrooms. Research into classroom assessment practices suggests that there is a divergence between approaches recommended by measurement specialists and those actually used by classroom teachers. A success bias was built into teachers' assessment practices. Final grades of their students appeared to represent a combination of formal and informal achievement measures as well as non-achievement measures. Burkhart, 1994, reviewed a number of earlier studies, finding that teachers often considered effort and ability as well as achievement when assigning grades, that elementary school teachers emphasize observation and informal measures of achievement, in contrast to high school teachers' tendency to rely on written measures of achievement, and that there was variation in teachers' grading practices. Macmillan, 2001, identified academic enablers, which included effort, ability, improvement, and participation, which along with achievement, external benchmarks, extra credit work, were considered as borderline cases as distinct components of teachers' grades in middle and in high schools in Virginia. The research questions. How do high school teachers assess the written work of ESL versus non-ESL students in mainstream classes? What relative weights do teachers of mainstream classes assign to achievement and non-achievement factors when assessing the written work of ESL students? And how does this compare with the weighing of achievement and non-achievement factors assigned by the same teachers when they assess the written work of non-ESL students? Methodology. The research questions were investigated through the naturalistic inquiry. Data was collected through the use of in-depth interviews guided by a list of questions reflecting both research literature and the research questions underpinning the study. The interviews were semi-structured, which allowed for the participants to elaborate on their attitudes and experiences. Research site and participants. The research site was a private school in Ontario in which 1/3 of the population were international students from Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Indonesia, Venezuela, Mexico, and Germany. This study focused on assessment practice of teachers of mainstream classes, therefore it did not include ESL or FSL teachers. All participants had at least 1 year teaching experience in the Ontario private school and had made assessment decisions for both ESL and non-ESL students. Teachers of mainstream classes during the academic year 2003-2004 therefore formed a convenience sample for the purpose of this study, and all were invited to participate. 2 female and 5 male teachers agreed to participate. Collectively, the participants reported assessing a variety of types of written work by students, including lab reports, expository paragraphs and essays, projects, research reports, letters, tests, and examinations. Data collection and analysis. Individual interviews with each of the participants were conducted from August to October 2004. These interviews were approximately 1 hour in length and were audio taped. The interviews were relaxed, with participants discussing their assessments and related experience at some length. The interview was conducted by one researcher who generated field notes after each interview. Interviews were transcribed verbatim, segmented, and labeled according to the data analysis procedures outlined by Macmillan and Schumacher 2001. Data analysis involved an itinerant process of examining the collected data segments, field notes, and interview transcripts, grouping topics into categories and subcategories, and identifying themes in the participants' comments. The themes were used to build a portrait of the assessment-related practices that participants reported using at OPS. Findings and discussions. First research question. How do high school teachers assess the written work of ESL versus non-ESL in mainstream classes? A distinction emerged from the data between the participants' views of ESL students and the writing these students produced. Each participant readily outlined characteristics of good writing for the subject area in which he or she taught. However, the written work submitted by ESL students often fell short of the participants' expectations with respect to writing style. One question raised by Eric was, do we mark the work ESL students produce, or do we mark the learning? He responded by saying that he would mark the learning and growth process, in which he viewed most of his ESL learners as actively engaged. Maria said the writing skills of both the ESL learner and non-ESL learner were generally weaker than she expected. The participants respected the ESL learners in their classes, but at the same time identified a number of assessment-related issues relating to this cohort of students. Differentiated assessment approaches. Research question 2. What relative weights do teachers of mainstream classes assign to achievement and non-achievement factors when assessing the written work of ESL students? Douglas adhered strictly to a rubric criteria when assessing, and as a result, ESL students scored lower than non-ESL students in his class. Based on their awareness of the challenges faced by ESL students who are acquiring a new language in addition to subject-specific content, Eric and William lowered their expectations of style when assessing the written work of ESL students. Ross, Faith, and Maria alluded to interpreting test and examination answers written by ESL students, searching for evidence of ESL students' understanding of curriculum concepts. In spite of the adjustments in the assessment strategies adopted by most of the participants, ESL students were nonetheless perceived to remain at a disadvantage relative to their non-ESL peers. The third research question, how does this compare with the weighing of achievement and non-achievement factors assigned by the same teachers when they assess written work of non-ESL students? The results of this study reflected a mix of achievement and non-achievement measures, with the exception of Douglas. The marks for both ESL and non-ESL students in Ross's history and civics classes included components for effort, participation in class discussion, and homework completion. Ross's colleagues included the following non-achievement elements for ESL and non-ESL students when grading assignments or arriving at term or final marks. However, because the participants generally used a case-by-case approach to assessment decision, they did not quantify the effect of non-achievement factors on report card marks. However, Douglas was the exception because the effect of the non-achievement factors on students' marks was positive due to the fact that students' marks were bumped up. This is consistent with the success bias referred to by Chex, McMillan, and Nash. During the research, a theme emerged that the participants generally valued and rewarded the non-achievement factor of effort more than any other. Some of the participants had reported that effort might influence the marks if this meant a pass or fail for a student just below the 50%. The potentially multifaceted nature of the construct of effort was underscored in this study by the variety of indicators of student effort as referred by the participants. These findings suggest that research into the role of effort into teachers' assessment decisions will need acknowledgement for the complex nature of the construct of effort. Many of the participants reported that they felt varying degrees of stress due to the complex nature of assessing ESL students' written work, and teachers might apply differentiated measures to different groups of students. This finding suggests that teachers may find it difficult to set aside their knowledge of individual students and become impartial judges of achievement. This slide includes a table of the participants' assessment approaches. This table includes the non-achievement factors influencing assessment for ESL and non-ESL and the adjustments in assessment for the ESL students. In conclusion, this study revealed that there were discernible differences in how all but one participant in the study reported the assessment of written work, and this suggested a need for further research study. Marks based on achievement and non-achievement factors for ESL versus non-ESL varied among the participants for students in the same class. The separation of achievement and non-achievement on report card in Ontario can be confusing to parents, especially the parents of ESL students who are used to marks based solely on achievement. A second issue raised in the study is the need for professional development for mainstream teachers who have ESL students in their classes. Finally, many of the participants said that they valued growth, such as growth in mastery of the subject content, along with the growth in language development.